Well, the speech that I'm going to respond to is the one that spoke about painkillers, opioids. The main proposition of the speech states that opioids or painkillers are a cancer to the medical field and its patients. Off the bat, I did not feel any attraction towards this topic because I've never been engaged with any type of painkiller or opiate. However, just last week, I was rushed to the ER because my gallbladder has ruptured through pretty sizable stones, and the pain was intolerable. I have never felt anything like that. It was crying upon crying upon crying after Advil, but the Advil did not do anything. So when I got into the hospital, onto the uncomfortable bed that they have, and they put the IV on me, they give me 5 consecutive doses of morphine. Just for the comparison of passing any stone is compared to a mild heart attack or to a woman giving birth. That's how strong the pain is. So now knowing that I have a substance in my body, I decided to research it to see what's in me, what is causing me this sensation of pleasure, because it instantly took the pain away. So now that I did my research, I'm able to respond to the lack of legitimate data that my opponent chose to adopt in his speech. So let's go ahead and start with my major claim response. The claim of fact speaker failed to fulfill the prompt's purpose by assessing the audience with misleading data, manipulated data, and poor speech structure, which led to a confusing conclusion. So now that being stated, let's go ahead and focus on the first area of problem, which is the structure of the speech. Let's break down the proposition. Opiates, painkillers, are a cancer to medical field and its patients. That is not clear because it's very up to you how you want to perceive that. I mean, we all know that cancer is bad, but it's very hypothetical. It's not very clear on what it is. And the point of a claim of fact speech is that the proposition needs to be a declarative statement, not a question. If you're asking something, there's going to be multiple sides to the issue that we're not going to be able to concrete in something. So now that this proposition is not being cleared, we can move on to the secondary claims, where he doesn't really choose a side on the speech. He doesn't talk about how the opiates are addicting and why they're addicting. He chose to speak about stuff like alternatives to opiates. However, he's not letting you know how you can deal with it to cut it. He's just giving you alternatives, drugs upon drugs, to get rid of the addiction to opiates. In the claim of fact, the speaker proposition says opioids are a cancer to the medical field and its patients. However, half of his speech consisted of the monetary data of how much it costs and how much people are spending. However, that is not part of the proposition, which just weakens the argument. My second secondary claim states that the data used to defend the proposition of the speaker was insufficient, manipulated, and poorly cited for the convenience of the speaker. The speaker went on very vague websites such as drugabuse.gov to get his data. And there he found a piece of data that states in 2014 there were 43,000 suicides in the United States, and 24 of those suicides were directly linked to opiates. However, if you were to read the actual article, it was defending opioids and how they are bringing suicide rates down. So just a couple paragraphs down, I found this statement. It says, scientific research has established that medication-assisted treatment of opioids addiction is associated with a decrease in number of overdoses. What just means is that it's contradicting his whole point there. So if you're manipulating the data, you're not being reliable, you're just trying to pick and point what's best for you. And when you are doing this claim of fact speech, when you want to be as clear as possible, your adequacy is not present and you're not going to sound proficient. My next secondary claim states the premise of the speech is redundant because it's based on a well-known fact and very much present in our daily lives. This means, we all sat through a 6-minute speech about how the overuse of a drug or painkiller is going to harm your body. As knowledgeable individuals that we all are, we all know that the overuse of any substance, be it water, be it food, be it a drug, is going to be harmful to your body. So he's just continuing to be redundant because this stuff that we already know, there's no controversy there to actually peek aside. We already know that the overuse of any type of substance is going to harm your body. So to summarize, opioids are actually a are actually a medicine, are a medical, I lost the word, sorry. Well, opioids are not here to harm your body, they're actually here to relieve the pain and the stress. So the overusage of people who are using it are from their behalf, and the people from hospitals are not over prescribing it, they're just giving the doses as you need it. And thank you.
Everybody clap like that, you feel cheer.
All right, Mario, you labeled the advocate's claim, and you're kind of presenting an interpretation of what the argument is, plus you're offering criticism. It sounds like it's almost a critique of the argument rather than a refutation of the argument when you start talking about how his speech is structured and how information is not complete and used in an appropriate way. I think that there is some refutation in those kinds of arguments, but at times it sounds like it's criticism of the way the speech is put together rather than the argument itself. I do think that you get a lot of, you play the credibility card there based on the experience that works pretty well, suggesting, that there is in fact a need for this. And so your firsthand experience is pretty solid on that. I think you could expand on that with a little additional research. For instance, how many people are prescribed opiates on an annual basis, for instance, and then let's contrast that with the number of people that end up abusing opiates. Certainly there is abuse of opiates, but the question becomes, is that typical? Is that because anytime somebody uses an opiate, they become a problem? And I don't think that that's the case. And you, at least for the moment, appear to be one of those examples. You got it when you needed it, and you're done with it, I hope. Let's hope that we're not running into a problem. And some data like that, I think, would support your position a little bit better, as opposed to going off on his metaphor about it being a cancer. I mean, I appreciate the idea that you're challenging this notion of the comparison that's being made there, but I don't think that gets you very much. It doesn't get you to the essence of the argument. Basically, the argument comes down to this notion that opiates are easily abused and that there are effective alternatives, and therefore we don't really need to have the opiates, and the only people who want to keep using them are money-grubbing, pharmacists and people like that, pharmaceutical companies. I mean, if you can summarize the purpose of the argument, it's a lot easier to figure out what the responses ought to be, instead of looking at the claims that they've made and say, well, let me respond to the claim. We had kind of the same argument I mentioned earlier, I think, with Miriam's speech, where she's found a claim that somebody's made, and she wants to respond to that particular claim instead of looking at, well, why was that claim there in the first place? That's where the argument is on that particular point. So I think you run into that a little bit as well. One thing that I think it would be helpful is if you could demonstrate that all those alternatives that are being mentioned don't work as effectively. I mean, you have Advil as an illustration on that. I'm not sure that that was on the advocates list of alternatives that they were talking about. But the notion that morphine is necessary to reduce pain, and for example, there might be a lot of people who have chronic pain and morphine addiction, although it's not the best thing in the world, it's better than living with the chronic pain that they have, which might cause them to be depressed. The information that you had concerning the suicidal tendencies, I think your second information where you say down below, it, 2 paragraphs later it says this, I think your interpretation of that information is not necessarily reflective of the point that the advocate was presenting. It sounded to me, as you were presenting it, that there are ways to address the kinds of addiction that people have, which then reduces the depression and the suicide rate on that. I'm not exactly sure that it denies that there's a relationship between opiate use and depression and suicide and that kind of thing. So I thought you had the right idea in trying to find the argument there. I'm not exactly sure it applies there. I'd have to look at both sets of information to be able to make that conclusion. And then your argument about it being redundant, I thought that was pretty straightforward. Nope. Being addicted to a drug, using a drug, abusing a drug, that's bad. No argument here. So why are we spending a lot of time talking about that? The question is the abuse of the drug inherent in the drug? Does anybody who gets prescribed an opiate automatically have a problem? Are there ways to control, restrict, prevent that from happening, to use it appropriately? Has it been used appropriately? That's the stuff that I think you need more of. And you've got a little bit of that in your own personal experience. You need more of that in the more general argument. All right, thank you.